Welcome and thank you so much. We've had a great afternoon of presentations already, and I'm going to be speaking about been there, done that, and talking about 10 fundamental UX design mistakes that you want to avoid. And in this presentation, and make sure I'm going to be clicking here. Oh, see, we've got it. I tested this earlier, but let's just double check again. So as Kevin mentioned, Human Factors International, we've had the pleasure of working globally, and so the experience that I'm going to be able to relate to you comes from that. And you already gave me a nice little introduction on that, so we'll move forward and talk about when you're thinking about what are the characteristics of usable interfaces. And there are several ones that relate to that. When we look about characteristics of usable interfaces, they talk about things that are easy to learn, they're easy to remember, they're efficient so that the users don't have to spend a lot of effort on them. And we look back and say that they're actually even satisfying for the users as well. And this is really important. And we tie that back to the things regarding a good design. They are consistent. And when we look at consistency, we want to have the ability to prevent errors, all of these things that we talked about earlier, and provide feedback to the users, match the user's mental model. We've heard that actually several times today, people talking about mental model, very important piece. And helping users understand and provide feedback to them. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that we have a structure which we use heavily at HFI, which we call the VIM model, which stands for Visual, Intellectual, Memory, and Motor. So when we're thinking about when something is difficult, perhaps when you're doing a heuristic review, you can talk about, well, is that increasing the visual load on the users when they're looking at something? Or is it causing excessive memory load when they have to remember something that they saw on a previous screen? So the reason that I show these two slides at the beginning is to give you a context for going through these particular UX mistakes that we're going to be talking about. So the list that I have here, here's a list of them, and I'll show them at the end as well. We've got a list of about 10 mistakes that are being repeated today, and we who've been around in the industry for a while have encountered these mistakes actually in the earlier days of the internet and the web, and they're coming back around. They're like zombies. We can't get rid of them. So let's go through some of them, and I'll also give a little caveat to my talk, and that is, sure, there are going to be exceptions all the time. You know, there's not a global rule that applies to everything, but in general, these are some issues that we're going to be pointing about, problems, and talking a little bit about some recommendations on that. So the first one, that nasty thing, that mystery meat navigation. You know, the point where, you know, you're coming to a site, you're looking at an interface, and you're not able to actually intuitively understand how you can actually figure out what's clickable, where is it clickable, how am I going to get around on this? And that's a problem because if the user's confused, they're going to be inefficient, it's not going to work very well for them. So if you can avoid the problem, basically you're wanting to make sure that your navigation is obvious, unless you're an entertainment site. I mean, there are exceptions to this. But if you're not one of those, you want to follow the user's mental model and make sure that you're working toward your target users. So a little quick example, and I'm pulling from stuff that Luke Wroblewski has done, and certainly examples that we'll see on Jacob Nielsen's analyses and others. Well, here's one that talks about, hey, you know, look at, is truly the hamburger menu obvious to everybody? Does everybody know what it is? Your target users is really the important question, not necessarily. And he's got, yeah, the hamburger menu and the kebab menu. They are newer conventions, but they are not necessarily well known by everybody, and most importantly, by your particular users, unless you test and validate, which is what some of the other speakers were talking about. Number two. Talking about the pop-ups and pop-unders. You may be working in an environment where you have advertisers. You're needing to be able to display this information, these pop-up ads, etc. Well, that mistaken belief that if you force a promotion on somebody, put it right in front of their face, that they're actually going to read it, or they're going to actually sign up for that newsletter or take that action that you wanted them to do, we're all users in this instance, and we pretty much have a gut reaction to when somebody is pushing one of those things right in your face, and you wanted to go to that site and look up something, and all of a sudden something else is in your face. It's not pretty, it's not nice. So if you can use, and there are more thoughtful ways of using less aggressive promotional tactics, look for those seducible moments when you can actually better fit with the user's goals. And that's typically after they've accomplished their initial task. So let them get done what they need to get done, and then when they turn to possibly leave the site or move on, that's that seducible moment that you can present them with that advertisement, not initially right in their face. So example, and ashamedly here, I was out looking at UX Magazine, and I was actually looking up some stuff regarding user experience, and there comes the overlay right in front of me. First thing that I'm there. Am I going to be signing up for this? Probably not. It's not helpful to have that. And I don't think it was their site, but it was someone else's that had this pop under. As I was starting to close some windows, all of a sudden, here's this other thing that appeared up in there. Random. It doesn't seem to be a very effective way of having it work, and it's not conducive. You may have shown it to the users, but they may not have noticed or cared about it. And so we move on to the third one, which is these splash screens. Okay, you may understand that there may be occasions where you have to delay showing your initial interface because something is loading in the background. There may be a valid reason for that. But on the other hand, if you're just gratuitously showing sound or video animation or doing something to so-called enhance the brand, not necessarily the most effective way, because you're making the user wait. And that slower connection speed, that could be affecting other users. They may not be in the latest and greatest place with all the technology and bandwidth. So you need to be aware of that. So if you have to include a delay, all right, think about carefully, consider who your users are, their goals, and place it in a much better spot. So yeah, Forbes. I mean, here I'm going out to Forbes looking up some information. I get this, quote of the day, and some ad popped up there. It's like your eyes go to, like, going right to that, continue to the site. You're wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible to get to the task that you wanted to see. And even some of the agency sites here, well, you wouldn't necessarily consider this fully a splash screen, but it's not really the home page yet either. Here's the example where they've at least labeled the hamburger menu as a menu, but you're presented with this before you can actually get into the site. So not necessarily as effective when somebody's coming in trying to find something. Autoplay videos. Oh, you've all seen those and heard those. And that mistaken belief that users are going to actually watch that content if it plays automatically. When you consider that no one likes to be out of control, and when you are opening a site and this video plays automatically, it takes you aback. It's jarring. And so you don't want to have that happen. And unless the content has been captioned, there's an accessibility issue to it as well. So give the users control. Be polite and make sure that you're allowing them to be able to stop, start, pause, etc. So I'm not going to be showing any videos, but you've seen them all. That here's the dog that's going to be jumping, but I'm going to spare you that it's actually a video. It just rolls right in. Some of the sites, actually YouTube has gotten a little bit better. They're being a little more polite. You may notice that they have a little ability to control some of the autoplay. So yeah, they're getting a little bit smarter about it, even though you are out at a site looking for videos. That does make a little bit of sense that some of these things would autoplay. Okay, slowing access to search. This one really puzzles me. We've seen this before, and I'll harken back to the ones that I've just presented. We've seen these issues before. This one particularly, I think, is really insidious. That you're just by showing the magnifying glass, that you're then maybe doing a more minimalist, streamlined approach to search. Well, users should be able to find the search functionality easily, and they shouldn't have to click twice to get it. And the reason that you're wanting to avoid this is that, yes, you may have that, you may be on that mobile interface and it's really small. That might be the only time that you're going to have to really crunch it down to get maybe just the magnifying glass. And at least place it in an expected location. So here's an example, and I'm picking locally here. Church & Dwight, a $3 billion company. I picked just yesterday. This is not ancient. This is still on their site. I don't mean to be mean, but I mean really, here I've got to click on that just to get the search. It's not in the expected spot. I don't have a box for a $3 billion company. Gee, that doesn't seem like that's really helpful to have that. Now, here's a more modern one. Still just picked it up yesterday. Yeah, I was even looking for things about search, and as I get to the site, I see, well, way up in the corner there's this little bit of magnifying glass there, but I have to click to get the box associated with it. I realize that some sites are dealing with responsive design, and yes, that's a concern, but on a desktop site, there's no reason not to have that search box showing. Harder to find home. Many people are saying these days, you don't have to have a link to home. Now, the logo is fine. That's all people need. Link to home's not necessary anymore. But realizing that users can enter your site from a variety of places, and search engines may bring you down into that deep link, and then you're disoriented. You're like, well, where am I in the cyberspace of this particular site? So if you include a standard way to be able to get back to home, and that could be a home button, a link, a breadcrumb, these are at least places where people can get back to where they need to be. And this was an interesting example here out over in Australia. You take a look at this and you can say, well, how do I get back? And I did actually choose intentionally the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Had a little bit of fun with that. Well, do I click over here? Do I click here? What happens if I click up there? It's difficult. You don't know. And that bit of uncertainty is not helpful to the users. I had a little fun that looked about usability.gov, a good place if you don't already know it about usability principles. They are taking advantage of theirs, where they at least have the home in the breadcrumb area. And the last one that I have here is, all right, YouTube. They don't necessarily have an explicit home link on their initial page, but as you get down a little bit further into the site, you'll then find that they do have it in their menu area, and they've actually got the icon in there as well. So some improvements on some of the examples that we've seen here. Moving into poor contrast. Well, that belief that minimalist, light gray, that's the way to go. We're looking modern by doing that, okay? We want only these certain elements to stand out, but not the text. Well, it's a mistake because we need higher contrast, especially if you're on mobile devices. Why are you doing that middle light gray when somebody's out in sunshine, if we had it this afternoon? So you've got to make your design choices based on the needs of the target users. And don't blindly follow what tends to be current design trends. It's not necessarily right for your users. So we come to, this is over at Squarespace. And I'm amazed, and you're probably squinting looking at it. Yes, you'd be squinting even if it was on normal size on your desktop. That's how hard it is to read. And they even take it further. As you're looking at Squarespace, which is helping other people supposedly make their sites, okay, we have dark gray on black. Well, how useful is that? I mean, and to me, as someone who's been in the industry for a long time, I love the fact that there are these great tools that make sites easier for other people to build. I mean, from hand coding days, this is so much better. But if people are coming out and looking at these sites as examples and designs and saying, oh, that's what I need to do to have a new, modern looking site, the example that they're giving right now with this poor contrast is not good. Okay. So next one. Someone earlier talked a little bit about mandated browsers. And again, there are times where, yes, you may have to require somebody to upgrade their browser, their version number. But if you're doing it capriciously, if you're doing it in a way that you're just expecting everybody to have to upgrade to the latest version, not helpful, because not everybody has administrator privileges. Example of a woman who was in one of my classes, and she said, within our company, In order to have somebody upgrade their browser, they have to have one of the technicians come over, and that's like, $70 per hour times how many machines times whatever. It's a huge deal for some people to have to upgrade. So be careful, know your users. I keep coming back to that. Know your situation, don't just blindly require it. And so here is an example from one of the sites where I think this was a simulation, and in order to run the simulation, they needed a particular browser. And another thing, not necessarily associated to browsers, but it makes you think that it's associated with browsers. This actually is malware. This is where somebody can click on something thinking that they're going to be upgrading their browser, and they've actually downloaded some bad stuff in their system. So people are using this technique to get into your systems for bad reasons. So be careful about that. Poor visual affordance, where we're talking about the mistaken belief that the visual cues to indicate clickability, not needed anymore with flat design. We don't need it. We don't need anything three-dimensional. That's not necessarily, that's too much, we don't have to do it anymore. Well, the users can't be expected necessarily to guess and to, we used to call it mind sweeping, where you'd have to kind of, move your mouse over and see when you got the hand so that you could then figure out, oh, is that clickable or not? These things we have seen, we have done, we've been there before. We don't need to repeat these problems again. So make use of the expected signifiers of clickability. And typically having some dimensionality is helpful. Yes, location or where something is on a page does indicate some clickability, but we've got to know, is it for your particular target audience? So one of my favorite sites that I use a lot, and very current when I saw the prediction for snow for today here, is Weather Underground. And great site in terms of all that they offer. This is just a portion of the site. But what you don't have on this particular interface is a good understanding of all the elements that are clickable. And there was a time where I normally would be scrolling, and then I actually clicked on one of these, and then I got like the full day, or excuse me, the full hourly information. It's like, oh, I didn't know that was clickable. There was a line here, I didn't know that that was movable. There were so many things on this that I had no idea they were clickable and movable. And I really shouldn't have to struggle for that. You want to make sure that things, if they're clickable, they should be obvious to the user. And moving into the last one now, mysterious icons. And earlier, when our fellow presenter was presenting his model about the elevator moments, and when he put up his particular ones, he had at least a label for each one of those new icons that he was showing us. Helpful, because there are no such things as universal icons except for just a very few. And for those of us who've been around for a while, even it's so humorous, the image of the floppy disk as being the save. I mean, who has used a floppy disk within the last 6 months or year? Nobody. Nobody. I mean, it really is. I mean, we know this younger generation here is like, they're not understanding this at all. But what we realize is that users may not necessarily recognize what a particular icon represents, and so they may not know then what this functionality stands for. So you've got to test, and several of our presenters talked about testing and validating with users, which is extremely important. And adding labels is very important because that will help people to understand what the particular icons mean. So again, picking from what Lou Wroblewski had talked about, there are not necessarily universal understandings of what these are. Like you look at that and like, well, what is that? I mean, we pretty much know what home is, and we've these other ones, the search icon, but these others, trash has been there for a while. If you don't have labels on them, people are not going to necessarily understand them, and so you don't want to have it sort of a self-feeding group here too, where you're just designing for yourselves. I was so pleased, Kevin, that every presenter today has really talked about the importance of understanding the users and doing work and studying and testing with the users. And that's really, really key to making your success in your site, so that you're not repeating mistakes that have been made previously. So summing up all of the different mistakes that I've pointed out here, and wanted to also give a chance to kind of bring it down to what we've talked about, which is simply know thy users, for they are not you. I mean, if you just keep that in mind, that is one of the most simple things to remember to make usable and useful interfaces. So at that point, I think I'm ready for some questions.
Questions for Mary? Maybe from somebody in the audience who does remember what a floppy disk was.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mary. My last project, we were struggling with, we have had a mobile and desktop responsive design, and I was trying to promote that we need labels because these were not universally accepted designs, and it was mostly a visual designer oriented, where the UX person is kind of playing piggyback as opposed to the other way around. And that their particular sensibility was go like Google, everything's all Google. And one of the things that I found was we don't want to have the labels necessarily on the mobile product. However, the mobile product, you don't have the hover to find out what does that mean.
Right.
So it almost sounds like you almost need the labels, even though that kind of kills the clean design, especially given the limitations on that platform. Okay. So can you address that?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a great question. And I think it's what is it? A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and I don't know the full quote, but yeah, if you want to have a minimal design, that's okay. But if at the point you are sacrificing usability for the sake of the design, then you shouldn't be going there. I think that really is a mistake, and I believe Bruce Tognini and Donald Norman have written an article recently about that if you take it to the extremes and you don't study your users, test things with your users, then you're making a mistake, and that's why I've said know thy users. That's the best way to understand and to test and validate. Otherwise, you're guessing, and we don't want to be guessing. We want to be efficient. Other questions?
So the topic of the splash screens, do you think that that's poor planning, or do you think that it's poor navigation, or why do you think there's such a prevalence of splash screens today?
A great question about splash screens and why there might be a great resurgence of it. I honestly don't know. I can't, there just are probably a lot of reasons why they're coming back. I think that because they offer a big, large visual right at the beginning, and it's not necessarily a cluttered homepage, so to speak. You can kind of present one clean message at that point. That might be part of the reason. Advertising pressures are always something, or brand pressures might be another reason. But beyond that, it really would vary to the company and organization. And once again, it's like, I can give you my opinion, but I don't know. You'd have to find out from the particular organizations. Right? Another one here?
So regarding splash screen itself, sometimes you have to inform the user about any system upgrades or any enhancements that are going to change what the user is going to now expect under the hood. So at that time, presenting a splash screen just before they interact with the new system, but as long as give them the option that do not show this to me again. So you kind of respect my decision, I've read through it, and don't show this. Would that be an acceptable paradigm?
It sounds like you've thought through things well, that if you're giving the user control and you're giving them a reason why, and it's not gratuitous, the reason that you have the splash screen, sounds like you're doing the right things. But once again, that's only my opinion. The best way, test it with some users and find out. But it sounds like you're on the right track. So, yes?
All right. Thank you, Mary.
Right. Thank you.